Today we're going to talk about the case of Lavender Doe. No, that's not her real name, but you'll have to stick around to find out who it is. If you like resolutions to mysterious, cold cases, then you'll love this story. Several years ago, the body of a girl was found burning in the woods. For years, she was unidentifiable and no one had filed a missing persons report that matched. But more recently, her identity has been confirmed thanks to a group of true crime fans with some great stalking skills. Super early one October morning in 2006, two men saw flames out in the woodsy oil field near Longview, Texas. They followed the flames and initially thought the scene was a burning mannequin that may have been some sort of Halloween prank. But as they got closer, the smell suggested otherwise. This was a human corpse. The men immediately called the police, who came out to the scene as quickly as they could. The body had been set on fire just minutes before the men discovered it. Due to the burned state of the corpse, by the time the flames were put out, it was hard to determine much about the victim's identity other than the basics. Coroners concluded this was the body of a white or Middle Eastern female between the ages of 17 and 25 with strawberry blonde hair. The woman had on a lavender shirt, which contributed to her nickname, Lavender Doe. There was evidence of male DNA, which indicated the woman had been intimate or forced upon by someone shortly before her passing, which is believed to have happened sometime between 8:15 and 10 p.m. that previous night. After the initial crime scene investigation and autopsy, the next step was to identify who this woman really was. Unfortunately, officials couldn't really go off of the victim's outer facial features because she was burned beyond recognition. But they could compare her dental records to see if there were any matches in the missing persons database. The teeth became a highly talked about aspect of Lavender Doe's case because that was really the one identifying feature the authorities had to go off of. And of course, it was shocking that her teeth were perfect. Now, given that generalization, you'd think that she'd be a little bit easier to identify. But sadly, that wasn't the case. Days, weeks, and then years passed, and the identity of Lavender Doe remained unknown. She didn't match any of the missing persons report on file, and no other reports were filed since her discovery that she was a match too. It always makes me so sad when this happens. Like, there has to be someone out there who's missing this woman, but maybe they're too scared to come forward. Or maybe this girl had run away as a child and she wasn't in touch with her family anymore. Lavender Doe was eventually buried in an unmarked grave in Texas, but the search for her identity and the identity of her killer continued. In 2013, her body was exhumed for a CT scan that was used to create a 3D digital rendering. After that rendering was released, a woman saw it and thought it looked like her daughter, who went missing around that time in the Longview area. Her name was Brandi Wells, and she was a 23-year-old woman who went out to a nightclub in August of 2006, never to return home again. It seemed like a solid lead, but after a DNA test was run, officials determined Brandi Wells wasn't a match for Lavender Doe. It's so crazy how similar the case details were, though. Like, it makes me wonder if maybe their disappearances could be linked by the same criminal at least. Well, with all leads exhausted, investigators decided it would be best to go back to what little facts they knew about the case. Sometimes you can look over things several times and on the 10th review, you notice something new. Maybe the condition of her teeth could lead them to some other clue. A lot of other people suspected that one of Lavender Doe's parents had to be a dentist or something, given the immaculate state of her teeth, or maybe another relative. But the more you think about it, the harder that lead sounds to narrow down, because if you think about it, everyone has to be related to a dentist somewhere along the line, right? If it's not just a parent or a grandparent, then it could be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, second cousin, family friend, a neighbor, anybody really. Then that brings us to the second solid piece of evidence, the male DNA sample collected from the victim's body. There were no matches at the moment. The gist of this case is not enough information, not enough evidence, not enough leads. But you always hear about those cold cases that are cracked years later due to advancements in technology, new witnesses, or smart web sleuths, so the hope wasn't totally lost there. In 2018, a suspect was identified in the decades-old case of the infamous Golden State Killer using genetic genealogy, which is a fancy way of saying they tracked people down using a combination of DNA tools and ancestry databases. Due to the success of this new approach, several groups were formed to revisit cold cases and solve them. A group of 3 volunteers from the DNA Doe Project had been researching Lavender Doe's case and exchanging messages on Facebook to discuss. All 3 members, Kevin, Missy, and Lori, considered themselves genealogy enthusiasts who love solving cold cases, identifying victims and criminals, giving families closure, and all the other amazing reasons to go into the true crime field. Although they didn't go to school for it or anything, they were passionate, determined, and great at stalking for a good cause. And that's the beautiful thing about these web sleuths. They use the tools of the internet to their advantage, and they even volunteer their time to research these cases that have been overlooked by the authorities. So, several people from the DNA Doe project were looking into Lavender Doe's case, but Kevin, Missy, and Lori were the most dedicated. After searching through public records, MySpace profiles, and any other information that they could find, the volunteers believed that they had successfully traced Lavender Doe's ancestry back over 100 years, like before her family immigrated to North America from Europe. They got in touch with a reporter named Sarah, and the four agreed to all meet in Texas to see if they could solve this case once and for all. Right around the time they connected on Facebook, there was actually a huge breakthrough in Lavender Doe's case. The male DNA recovered from the victim's body was matched to a man named Joseph Wayne Burnett. I think Joseph was questioned by the police, and that's when he admitted to picking up a woman in the area to hook up, but he denied ever even killing her. Yeah, right. Well, shortly after the ID was made, the body of a woman who'd been living with Joseph was discovered. He confessed to killing her, and that's when he also confessed to doing the same thing to Lavender Doe. But he said that instance was different because he didn't know Lavender Doe. He just happened to meet her at a Walmart parking lot and acted on an impulse. Whereas his more recent victim was someone he knew very well. And I wasn't sure at first why he went out of his way to explain himself, because both scenarios are awful. But that's when I realized he probably said that because he couldn't help ID Lavender. But our amazing volunteer detectives knew they could find a way to get to her name. In October 2018, the DNA Doe Project crew got Lavender's DNA and uploaded it to a genealogy database to hopefully find a partial match. During their work, one common factor kept appearing: the Czech ancestry. That's when they theorized Lavender had to be a descendant of a Czech immigrant. And there's a huge Czech population in Texas, so that seemed accurate. Somewhere along the way, Kevin found a descendant of Lavender's ancestors. It was a woman in her 50s who was living in Texas, just 30 miles from where Lavender was found. He passed along his findings to Lieutenant Eddie Hope. Eddie drove out to meet the woman and filled her in on the case. She said she didn't know of a missing person in her family, but she was willing to give her DNA to be compared with Lavender's. Turns out, this woman was definitely related to Lavender. They appeared to be first cousins removed, which meant Lavender was most likely the child of the woman's cousin. But this woman didn't know of a cousin who had a child that disappeared. So it had to be a cousin she may have not even known about. We'll leave it to the armchair detectives to do their due diligence. Kevin searched through the depths of this woman's family history and hit the jackpot. One of her uncles had a daughter named Robin from a previous marriage. The woman had no idea about Robin, but the unknown cousin part checks out. Robin passed away at age 50 from an illness of sorts, and that happened in September of 2006, which was 1 month before Lavender was discovered. Oh, maybe that's why she wasn't reported missing. At the time, it was unclear whether or not Robin had a child. Through their research, Kevin and the other volunteers found out Robin had several husbands and was an alcoholic. She had been arrested a few times, which helped the volunteers find one of her husbands. So one of her arrests happened under the name of Robin Wilma Dodd. The last name came from her at the time husband, Johnny Dodd. Kevin searched Johnny's name on the internet and found out that he had a daughter that fell right in Lavender Doe's age range. Her name was Dana Lynn Dodd. Kevin entered the daughter's name in a database used by private investigators, and from that he discovered her social security number wasn't active anymore. And after 2006, she seemed to have fallen off the face of the earth, almost like she went missing or was mysteriously slain. Through a few searches, Kevin found the MySpace page of a nephew of Dana's, which led to Dana's profile featuring an image of a woman with strawberry blonde hair. Reporter Sarah ended up traveling to Jacksonville, Florida, where Dana's best friend from high school was living. Eddie was able to get in touch with Dana's half-sister, Amanda. He mailed her an ancestry DNA kit, and months later, the results confirmed that Dana Lynn Dodd was Lavender Doe. Finally, the unidentified girl with perfect teeth would get a face and name to be remembered by. It's such a bittersweet moment though. Like, Missy explained it well when she said, you want to have a party jumping up and down and, oh wait, we can't have that kind of attitude. Because yes, it's great that the victim was finally identified, but at the same time, it's sad to share with her family what happened. So what did happen? And why didn't Dana's family report her as missing all those years ago? Well, both of Dana's parents were alcoholics who found themselves in trouble with the law fairly often. Dana spent most of her childhood living with a stepmother in Arizona, and when she was 14, Dana's stepmother sent her off to live with her half-sister Amanda in Florida. Amanda helped Dana get into counseling, but Amanda was a teenager whose parents weren't in her life. She struggled a lot with that and resorted to downing in pills and smoking Mary Jane. She ended up dropping out of high school, dating some jerkwad, moving in with her bestie, and then leaving town for this magazine sales gig. Basically, the people Dana worked for lured her in by being all like, oh, this job's awesome. You got it, you get to travel. And then if their employees didn't hit their sales quota, they'd physically assault them, take food away, and reports say that there were substances involved too. Investigators have still been unable to track down the exact group she worked for, but just know they were awful. Reports say that Dana left her family in 2000 and was last seen in 2003. But as she was discovered in 2006, she was pretty much unaccounted for 3 whole years. And based on her distant relationship with her half-sister and the circumstances she left in, I can kind of see why Amanda didn't report her missing. On October 28, 2006, Dana was out selling lingerie from magazines in a Walmart parking lot in Texas. She approached Joseph and asked if he wanted to buy lingerie from this magazine. He said no. Then she asked if she could get in the truck with him. A lot of people believe Dana was desperate for a way out. She didn't want to work for these people anymore. And once Dana got in the car with Joseph, she agreed to be intimate with him. Somewhere along the way, Dana apparently stole money from him, which is what led him to strangle her and set her body on fire in the wooded area. One of the most disturbing things about it all is that Joseph left $40 in Dana's pocket, which he said she earned. In 2020, Joseph ended up pleading guilty to both homicides and was sentenced to 50 years in jail for each. Dana remains in the initial grave she was buried in because people had spent years looking after her there. The big difference now is that everyone knows her name and story. Can you believe these dedicated volunteers were the ones who solved this cold case? I'm sure you can, because if you're a true crime fan, like I think you are, you're familiar with similar cases that have been cracked using armchair detectives and genealogy websites. Seriously, that's what I love about the true crime community. Everyone wants to help give these victims the justice that they deserve and bring their families some comfort. Guys, thank you so much for watching another episode of Killer Bites. My name is Mack, and I'll see you guys next time.